Hello, everyone. Welcome to this evening's webinar. We'll just hold on for just a few minutes until everyone gathers together. So we'll be with you shortly.
If this was we were actually sitting in a room, I think we'd all be chatting slightly.
Yeah, exactly. No, that's true, actually.
It's quite an odd scenario. We're sort of, obviously, I understand we're waiting to start, but we're sort of sitting here, you know.
Talking quietly amongst ourselves.
Ourselves, yes.
How many people have we got logging on?
I don't think I can actually see the count at this very moment, but we've had a good response. Give it another couple of minutes. So just for those of you logging on, we'll just give it another few minutes to allow a few more people to join, and then we'll kick off at about 6 o'clock.
Explain where we are. Beautiful lots.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Tell me, when does the preview close?
Brilliant. The preview closes effectively at noon on Wednesday. So the sale is at 2 p.m. on Wednesday, and we're open until midday, just so they can reorganize the sale room a little bit.
I'm in St James's tomorrow, delivering some sculpture. So perhaps I may look in.
Please do, please do. 9 a.m. till 4:30.
Okay.
And the actual sale takes place on Wednesday at 2 o'clock. For anyone who is interested to physically be part of the sale in our new Bond Street galleries.
Do you have any restrictions in the number in the sale room?
We have a fairly large sale room here, so I think it's going to be come one, come all. We can space people out fairly well, I think.
All right, yeah.
Brilliant. So I think we might kick off. Welcome everyone to this evening's talk, Art or Eroticism, the Male Form Uncovered. My name's Matthew Haley. I run the book department normally, but I've been involved in this male form sale. This is my colleague Anastasia. Anastasia runs the Greek art department, but has been a great co-collaborator in this sale. So as you probably expect, we're going to be talking a lot today about the male form in art history from antiquity to the present day, a little bit about the market for this collecting area, how different people respond to it, how different markets respond, how contemporary art responds to it as well, how we deal with it on social media, and why it still has the power to shock. On that note, please just be a little bit aware that we do have some inevitably graphic images in our slideshow this evening, and we will be discussing genitalia in some detail. So if you're perturbed by this, and if you don't want to know the score, look away now. But otherwise, we're very glad to have you, yeah, there we go.
It is a pleasure that we introduce you to this evening's wonderful speakers. I would like to first start with Henry Miller, who has been a valuable collaborator for this sale. Henry Miller is the director of Henry Miller Fine Art, which is a London gallery showcasing a curated collection of works focusing exclusively on the male form, with works from the 16th century to the present day, including paintings, drawings, prints, and photographs. Then I would like to welcome Ian Rank-Broadley, who is one of the foremost figurative contemporary sculptors with works in the British Royal Collection, the National Portrait Gallery, and the British Museum. His memorial to Diana, Princess of Wales, commissioned by the Duke of Cambridge and the Duke of Sussex, will be unveiled on the 1st of July at Kensington Palace. And we are very glad to actually include one of his works in our sale. You can find it as lot 13. And last but not least, I would like to introduce Madeline Perridge, which is the gallery director at Kallos Gallery, a London gallery specializing in antiquities and ancient art. It is based in Mayfair, and it offers a wide range of antiquities from ancient Greek art to Roman art, as well as Egyptian, Middle Eastern, and coins.
On that subject, actually, both Bonhams and Kallos Gallery are taking part in London Art Week, which is open online and in galleries around London. And there are viewing rooms as well from the 2nd to the 16th of July. And more talks will be available online covering various aspects of art at londonartweek.co.uk. So we've been delighted to work with them as well. I suppose we should start with Henry, really, shouldn't we? And find out why nobody has really done a male form auction before in the UK, at least.
Well, I mean, there's a question, really. I've been doing this for a while. I mean, I suppose when Bonhams asked me to collaborate, it was virtually impossible for me not to reflect on, my collecting and over the last sort of 30 years. I started collecting as a teenager, and 30 years ago, the idea of such a sale was completely incomprehensible. I mean, not that long ago, there was a dealer in London called Adonis Art Gallery, and it was probably 15 or 20 years ago. And on at least one occasion, they ended up with a brick through the window. And, presumably it wasn't a commentary on a particular artist. So I think, as societal attitudes have changed, images of the male form have become more visible. I mean, we all remember David Beckham in the 90s with his Calvin Kleins. And even more recently, I was on Instagram yesterday, and J.W. Anderson, the sort of high-end fashion designer, has done a collaboration with the Tom of Finland Foundation and produced a series of tote bags which carry an image which is not that dissimilar to the Tom of Finland, which is in the sale. Except I think it's minus the genitalia, which I think is probably just a little too much for the high street. So, I mean, in short, really, I mean, I think, as prevailing attitudes in society have changed, the art market has, whatever that is, it has started to wake up to this very strong area of collecting. And I mean, I think in the past, it's always seen as a very niche market, but it's always been a very strong niche market. I mean, I know you're here as a moderator, the pair of you, but I mean, I know why I've been doing it for such a long time. But I mean, I could, ask the question, why now for Bonhams? I mean, it has been done before on a far smaller scale. I know there's someone who does it in Paris, but for one of the big three auction houses to take the plunge, for me, is groundbreaking. Someone who's been monitoring this market for a long period of time. So really, if you don't mind me asking, why now, really?
Well, I think, Bonhams is very lucky to have had a new wave of management really in the last 3 years or so, that's quite progressive and open-minded. And although we've been around since 1793, we sort of feel like now is the right time to do this, to try and push the envelope a little bit, to try and explore new avenues. And, it's very pleasing to us that the sale's fallen in June as well, during Pride Month. Our windows have rainbow banners. And we've been able to meet some actually very interesting clients as well, who might not normally kind of cross our threshold.
I have a question on that.
I'm sorry, Anastasia. I'm having difficulty hearing you. Sorry.
I'm going to go a bit closer. Can you hear me better?
Thank you very much.
I'm just wondering, when we were even very early on in the early stages of consigning works for the sale, and we had to create some visuals for our website, we had some comments that sometimes some of our works or images that we used were being a bit too provocative, and people were asking us to take them down. So I understand that working in this field can have some difficulties, and I know that you've been using Instagram a lot to promote your works. And I'm just wondering whether you had any experiences, probably during a fair, an art fair, or even through your social media, where you actually had to take down material, or you had to fight more about the market in which you're working and you're representing.
I mean, I think it's two quite separate things. One, Instagram has rules which are governed by computers, and the general rule is, if it's a photo, it doesn't matter if it's 1880 or 1980. If it's got any nudity at all, it will be taken down. And, you know, as someone who depends on Instagram a lot, it's a sort of constant fear of mine. So I end up in a form of self-censorship. I've actually got my photographer now who artistically adds paintbrush marks over the offending genitalia. And what's quite funny is that people think this is quite, sometimes they think it can add to the work. Ironically, I notice whenever I do it, there is a bump in people going to my website to actually look at what it really looks like without the addition. I mean, art fairs is quite different. I mean, 2 or 3 years ago, I was at Olympia Art Fairs, Art and Antiques, which is a very traditional art fair. And I had a stand, and I don't just sell male nudes. I sell portraits, I sell a whole variety of images. If it's got a man in it, then anything goes, really. And but I was showing, I represent an artist called Michael Leonard, who is actually most famous for painting the portrait of the Queen, but he also did the illustrations for The Joy of Gay Sex. But he does these wonderful nudes, and I was showing a female nude next to a male nude. And literally within 5 minutes of the fair opening, someone came up to me and was quite angry that I was showing this male nude at an art fair. I mean, he wasn't completely naked. He had a towel draped over him. But what I found really interesting about it was the fact that it was next to a female nude, which she did not see, or certainly did not complain about. She then, after gesticulating towards me, walked to complain to other stand holders, but passed a whole stand of sculpture, of female nude sculpture, which she did not see. And then I saw her sort of gesticulating. But I mean, I was sort of part shocked, quite pleased, but you know, I found it you know, when I've had time to reflect on it, quite interesting, because of, I think in that instance, it really reflected the different ways that male nudes and female nudes are seen in society. In a lot of cases, female nudes are not seen, but male nudes can cause offence. And to me, anyway, so.
No, I think that is interesting, and I think perhaps Ian, you can talk a little bit about your work. In fact, here's one of your pieces on view here, the one from our auction, and about that sort of balance of the male nude and then more kind of institutional works, perhaps.
Well, I chose to use the male nude because it had a sort of frisson, sort of slight shock value. Again, I found the female nude was largely ignored. People didn't see it, and therefore there appeared to be little point in using it. It had been far overused. You know, whether it's selling, you know, fancy luxury goods or cars or yachts or whatever it is, in the end, people just didn't see it. Whereas they were very mindful if they saw a glimpse of the male nude. So I realized quite early on, I was attracted to it. In fact, when I was a student and I was at the Slade School at UCL, I was at the time renting a room in Regent's Park, and I used to walk along the canal and go through Camden. And actually there was a rather seedy looking shop in Camden called Zipper. And what it did have in the window, it had the odd magazine of a sort of male pin-up. And I tried desperately hard not to look at this, certainly not while anybody else was looking at me, but occasionally I would find my attention pulling very sharply to one side as I took a glimpse of it, and then sort of stared wildly ahead and tried to retain that image. I never actually had the courage to go into the shop, but I think it proved to me that there was something there that actually was worth using. And, you know, I've always been, if you like, sort of an admirer of classical art, of sculpture, particularly. And, you know, to me, the naked body just seems so natural. I couldn't understand this fear of the penis, and more particularly the phallus. I mean, you know, there are people who think, you know, you drop dead if you saw the sight of one. Well, I mean, that's patently not the case, or else I'd have died an awful long time ago. But, you know, and particularly these days, it's on the touch of a button on the internet. You can see whatever you want to see, but still, nudity, nakedness in its ordinary state, and particularly the male, is still seen as shocking. And I often wonder whether it's people thinking it's shocking in themselves, or they're worried what other people see. I mean, I remember one day I was opening my studio doors, great sliding doors, and they were quite near the roadside. And two old ladies were walking past. And obviously they had a look in, and immediately I apologized for the rather strapping sort of nude that was actually in the studio. And these two old ladies, well into their 70s, elbowed me aside and said, "No, come on, dear, we want a closer look." And they actually came in the studio. And actually, you know, one's got to remember that, you know, even old people, they were young once and they enjoyed whatever it is. And one old girl said to me, she said, "Do you know what? It's half a century since I've seen one of those. And, you know, it brings back happy memories." So I think that, you know, people in themselves, privately, they'll enjoy it. You know, they sort of, they're not scared of it. Everybody's worried about what else everybody else thinks, you know. So
it was very interesting, I think, for us when we had these two sculptures by Mercier, which are lot 44 and 45, which can also be seen through the slideshow, where it's the same sculpture, but there are two versions. The one is being draped and the other one is being undraped. And we also have lot 43, which are 6 phallic amulets. And it's very interesting to, I would like to ask Madeline, what do these amulets represent during that time, and how contrary it can be to the idea of male genitalia that we have today?
Of course, it's, you know, I think we have to think of the ancient world as a completely different place in terms of its attitude to nudity, and particularly to male nudity. I mean, you're going back to ancient Greece, where male nudity, the athletic, toned, hewn figure, was the absolute height of beauty and of culture. It was, you know, it was the way that statesmen represented themselves, the, you know, important people, athletes. That was really it. That was the pinnacle. And so people were pretty used to seeing that. You know, very different to today, where I think, you know, female nudity is, as we've already discussed, is a little bit more sort of overlooked, because it's become very normal, become very sort of, you know, everywhere saturated. Whereas going back to ancient Athens, you really didn't have that. Female nudes were very much a fertility sort of statues, and had a very different feel to them. I mean, I do think that, sort of talking about the little phallic amulets, there is a distinction between, I suppose, the erect phallus and, you know, the classical nudes that you see, the Greek and Roman nudes. there's no getting around it, is there? They all have extremely small genitalia. And back in particularly ancient Greece, that was very cultured. That was the ideal. If you were looking more, there are very, very sort of, minimal images of realistic genitalia. You have tiny, tiny phalluses, or you have comedy erect ones, massive ones, huge ones in theatrical productions and on vases where it's all supposed to be a right laugh, and seen as barbaric and, terrible and not Athenian. And I wonder if that sort of image has been perpetuated today. We're used to seeing classical nudes with sort of unthreatening genitalia, and that has really continued, and people still feel threatened by it. The little phallic amulets are great though, because they're all to do with good luck and good fortune and keeping bad things away from people. So the Romans would have hanging pendants of bronze phalluses, which would in the wind would all chime together, and they would keep bad stuff away from your house. And small children will wear rings with a tiny phallus on them, so you keep your children safe by having them wear a little ring, with male genitalia on it. Very different.
I think I should have actually just said at the very beginning, for those watching us this evening, we do have a Q&A section, and later on in the talk we'll be taking questions from you in the audience. So do please contribute them through the Q&A, and we'll take those a bit later on.
I have a question for Ian. As we're talking about the erected and not erected male genitalia, how have you treated your own sculptures with regards to that part, and whether you had any clients that possibly have asked you to cover this part of men, and if you feel that female artists have a different treatment towards the representation of male genitalia?
Well, I was approached by a gallery in the West End, just off Bond Street, as to whether I could exhibit some sculpture. But, they're quite insistent that they couldn't show any male genitalia, and that I'd have to either remove it or conceal it. And so my answer to that was, well, I might as well remove a nose or an ear. The very thing that makes a male nude male is the thing between the legs, and that's the genitalia. And if you don't like it, then you're not the place to show my work. I think that, it is a problem in terms of, the most important thing actually is size. And when people say, size is everything, well, it is in to a degree. But, in some ways, I found through experience, if you were to put an over-large penis on a sculpture, the focus of attention is solely on the penis, and people don't see anything else. Now, I'm all for giving something which is, sort of realistic. But I had a very fine black dancer who was working for me, and he was handsomely endowed. And, when I actually modeled him as he was, people wouldn't look at the muscles on his back or the fantastic legs he had. They were just fixated. So rather sadly, I had to sort of dock it a little. He was quite happy, because as a dancer, he said he'd always got in the way, and he preferred something smaller. So when he said that, I said, well, I'm going on holiday soon. If I could borrow it for a fortnight, I'd be more than happy. The thing is that very often the penis, is always seen as rather a joke in many ways. And I think it's, a lot of it is embarrassment. And actually it's embarrassment about nudity per se. I mean, if I think back to my boyhood, if I went for a seaside holiday, there'd be all these naughty postcards with euphemisms and innuendo. And I don't think that the British public, of a certain generation has got beyond that. I mean, I think new and up and coming generations perhaps think differently. But
I'm interested, Maddie, in how this kind of ties in with your audience and your market, and whether you get people who are slightly sheepish about their interest in some of your nudes.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. It's one of those questions that I've not really thought about. I think working in this field, it's such an integral part of it, and predominantly, I mean, people will go, oh, that's a nice statue, but you know, it's a shame about all this drapery. You know, they're after that sort of pure nude, where it's all about the musculature, it's all about the, you know, the contrapposto, the balance. You know, it's almost like the drapery distracts from that sort of real classical image that people are looking for. I mean, I do think it is interesting, because I've never really thought about, oh, I probably shouldn't put that in the window in case that offends somebody strolling past in Mayfair. Whereas, and I do think that there's a bit of a distance there, isn't there? That ancient art is so far in the past, you know, they do things differently there, and it's all sort of expected. But people can't quite wrap their brains around it. In terms of modern and contemporary art, it's still got that sort of like feel to it, which I think, you know, classicism, it's sort of bound up with this sort of cultural ideal, and you know, we're all used to going to museums and seeing paintings with sort of classical nudity, and it's not threatening in the same way.
I think Henry, I think you have a kind of a test that you apply, don't you, about sort of, you know, what you can hang in public in your home.
Well, I mean, I think really, I mean, obviously picking up on that, but also I'm picking up on something with Ian was saying. I mean, I think attitudes are changing. It very much used to be the case, and I think for people of a certain generation, it is, you know, can I have it on the wall when my mother comes round to tea, you know? But of course, you know, we're all getting older, and mothers are, you know, from my perspective, are getting younger. And so I think to a generation, you know, of collectors now, younger collectors, as Ian was sort of alluding to, they don't even think twice about it. I have you know, I've met his mum, and his mum jokes about all the penises on the wall. And so, you know, I think it is sort of changing over time. I mean, I think, you know, I mean, I mentioned this before, but actually, whilst having the discussion, it really made me think about it even more. If you just take one drawing from the sale and you think about how that's changed over time, it's the same drawing. You know, the Tom of Finland in 1974 was for Male Physique magazines. It's an illustration which was for virtually a mail order, secretive magazine that would be sold in specialist shops. And that image 45 years later, or I can't even do the maths this evening, but is now being paraded in the high street on bags by high fashion designers. And that, to me, if you just think about that one image, is how things have changed. And of course, you know, collectors have changed. I have collectors who are, you know, in their 70s plus, and they're far more cautious about, I mean, their mothers might not be around still, but they're still of that generation where you might worry about what the vicar might say. Although, you know, I do sell to vicars as well, and you'd be surprised how racy some of their choices can be, you know, so.
I would like to ask something about, again, I'm going to take it from the female point of view and female artists. Henry, has it been hard for you to source paintings, prints, photographs of male from female artists?
Well, I mean, the thing is with my job is that because I'm very much driven by an image, not necessarily by artists, I never know what I'm going to find. I'm constantly looking. Obviously, I'm traveling less now, but I used to go to Paris a lot, and I never ever rule out. I would never dream of ruling out hanging a female artist, and I have, but it's always been slightly older works. But one of the most beautiful things that I've ever hung was a drawing from a large sort of academic, very in the style of Leighton, drawing by a woman called Ethel Marriott, and she was in the Royal Academy Schools. But obviously in the 19th century and prior to that, and even in the early 20th century, there were far few women artists. So because of the role of women in society, so inevitably that you were there's less to draw on. And I mean, I know that there, but if you look at sort of contemporary works now, there are a few female artists who are painting male nudes. I mean, obviously in the South, there's Elizabeth Frink. I must admit, I don't know a great deal about her. I know he knows a bit more, but about her. But so I think it's just, for me, it's a question of numbers, really. It's, I think, inevitably, because of the broad range of my gallery, for most of it, there weren't a lot of women painting. And so it tends to have been limited to the 20th century. But even then, I would imagine, although there were people who were focusing on the male form, I mean, I've forgotten her name, Laura Knight was another. Some of her circus people are just absolutely beautiful, stunning observations. I think there's just, it's a question, for me, it's a question of numbers, and that was because of the way that women artists, the role of women in society more generally, really, rather than anything else.
And Ian, as an artist, do you feel that female artists today are presenting the male form maybe in a more romanticized way?
Well, I think, you know, female artists today aren't sort of restrained or confined in any way. I mean, they're free to look at the male nude, and in perhaps they are reversing the tables. I mean, I think that there's a long way to catch up, but I think they view the male nude differently from their perspective. And I think that's very interesting. I mean, their images, from what I've seen, tend to be somewhat softer, not so radically sexual, although they're still sexy. And so I think there is a difference. You can tell, I think, the difference between a male nude, if it was created, shall I say, by a man or a woman. I mean, whether that changes over time. I mean, where Henry mentioned Elizabeth Frink, I think she really was a pioneer, because she was unabashed in her use of the male nude. And, you know, she didn't mess around with tiny genitalia. You know, I mean, she gave them a reasonable sized cock and balls, and it was in your face. And I think one rather admired her for that. I think, you know, she'd seen some of Leni Riefenstahl's photographs of the Nuba. And, you know, that particular image and the inherent eroticism in the body of the Nuba, I think was something which really perhaps drove her forward. And in many ways, she could perhaps get away with it because she was a woman looking at men. I think, you know, one of the things I've always had a problem with, and certainly as a student, you know, people would look sideways and say, well, why are you interested in men? Why are you interested in male nudes? And, you know, it was a time, I think, in the 70s when there was still a great deal of homophobia. So, you know, one had to be perhaps rather circumspect or careful. And then I got to a point where, in the end, I didn't care. I knew that I was compelled to use this image in my work. And I thought, stuff it, you know, I'll do whatever I want. And so I, you know, pursued it. You know, again, people say, well, are you a gay artist? And my response to that was, actually, I'm a sculptor who looks at the male body. And that body, that work of art is for everyone. And it doesn't matter what age, what sex you are. You know, I didn't want it to be something which is seen as perhaps a niche sort of product.
Maddie, I mean, Ian mentioned Nuba and you know, African figures vis-a-vis Elizabeth Frink. I mean, I wonder if you could talk a bit about sort of cultural differences. Obviously, we've talked about Roman and Greek, but Kallos Gallery also deals in coins and some Middle Eastern, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, it's, you know, I think you're dealing with a sort of a global market and art from of global backgrounds, and you know, there is obviously a challenge in understanding people's cultural sensitivities. You know, I think in any art market you have to be sort of aware of what you're doing or what you're offering. I mean, I do think that in the collection of ancient art, it is a lot about, you know, the people who've gone before you, and people often do collect artworks, you know, from their own culture, but I think it has a much broader appeal than that. So we don't really experience too much where people go, oh well, I don't buy that sort of thing, you know, that's not my my interest, or, you know, absolutely no nudes. It does happen every so often, and, you know, I think, you know, if you, I'm always surprised. Let's put it that way. It's not something that I normally think of, because, you know, you do think art collectors, they usually have very broad minds and they're very open. But, you know, I think religion is always something that, you know, that changes and drives interest. And so, yeah, there certainly is an issue there, where with most of what we handle is figural. And, you know, if there is an issue with images that have figures on them, and, you know, that's not something that you can engage with, you know, we do have to be conscious of that.
No, indeed, and I think, you know, obviously the effect of, you know, Christianity, apart from anything else, on the male nude was huge, and, you know, the Greeks and Romans were merrily dancing around naked, and that all changed. As I said, we are open for questions from the audience, so I don't know if any are popping in there. Anastasia, she's keeping an eye on. We need to open it up. I think we've opened it up to questions as and when any come along, so do feel free to pitch them to us.
On that question, I just wanted to ask Madeline whether there is a distinctive difference between the way that the art itself is being treated between cultures, because you mentioned about the collector's side, but because you're dealing with also antiquities in Middle East, except of the Roman and ancient Greek sculptures, I was wondering whether there is a significant difference in the way that they're being, that this part of the male figure is being treated in a different way, for example, or the way that they're being presented in general is different.
Yeah, I mean, it's, you know, it's obviously, you know, different areas of the ancient world did deal with things quite differently. But, you know, when you're looking at ancient Egypt, for example, nudity was far less of an image that they were interested in projecting. But you do find that because of the spread of sort of Hellenism and, you know, the sort of the Greco-Roman world, it expands so far that even areas where, you know, classical nudes, the nude as a concept hadn't really existed before, that starts to just spread. And I think that's what you sort of have to remember, is that a lot of, you know, the Middle East became Greek, it became Roman, and you do get this sort of traveling imagery that goes along, and of course, you know, that only really changes with the advent of Islam, where obviously, you know, iconography and imagery was completely, you know, is gone to a certain extent. So yeah, it's, I suppose you just have to keep thinking that the classical world was so vast, and over
No, absolutely, and
time.
And I think, you know, that's the Warren Cup, the British Museum's Warren Cup. Actually, these are the Pride Cups here on the screen, which are based on a sort of reinterpretation of the British Museum's Warren Cup. The Warren Cup is believed to have been found in the Middle East, and it's thought that it was actually buried because there was a sort of local kind of Jewish uprising, and the Romans actually had to flee back to home ground and bury the Warren Cup, which is why it survived for nearly 2,000 years.
Yeah, it's such an interesting sort of, you know, idea, and I think, you know, as obviously with an extension of what we're discussing here, I think, you know, the concept of homosexuality changes hugely through the ancient world and geographically as well. In ancient Greece, you know, this is something that was very normal. This was very accepted. But then, you know, you move into Rome, and you know, things have changed. You know, the idea of homosexuality is treated quite differently. It's not, you know, it's obviously it's not outlawed. It's not a terrible thing, but it didn't have quite the sort of the cultural norm that it did in ancient Greece. So there's a lot of sort of jokes about emperors and their favorites, and these sorts of, you know, sort of nudge nudge wink wink things going on. You know, it was you know, this attitude to homosexuality being very sort of, oh well, you know, it's a bit Greek, it's a bit Eastern, you know, they get up to other things here, but you know, we're Romans,
Yes.
and we don't do things like that.
Anastasia is feeling a bit self-conscious because of its, you know, the Greek vibes,
The Greeks.
and that sort of thing.
It's interesting because actually in Greece we would never refer to it as the Greek way. It would be the Turkish way. But that's for other reasons.
The what? Sorry, the what way?
The Turkish way.
The Turkish.
The
well,
Ottoman way. It's never the Greek way.
You always just pass it over a little bit
Yeah.
to the next
Yes,
country
yes.
a lot. I see we've had a couple of good questions in. Do you want to run through the first one, maybe?
Yes, we have a question. Madeline, Anastasia, congratulations on the sale. Has this themed sale attracted many new buyers to Bonhams, do you think? Is it a sale you would likely repeat? I think the answer is yes. It has been very interesting because I think the sale has attracted collectors also from different departments and different markets, and I found, at least through the previous exhibitions, that people who possibly came to see an antiquity, they were really phoned by the rest of the exhibition, and they got to see other Greek works, you know, like the Lebesis work that we have, the Gormley. It has such a variety.
I think there's been a real crossover impact. I mean, we were talking to a colleague today who said that, you know, somebody had been attracted into the sale by you know, the cover lot and one of the lots we'd been featuring quite heavily, and actually was drawn into it because of that context, and actually then was branching out into other areas. So we've had some great meetings and great contacts with people.
Could I just add? I mean, one of the things that I think which is great about the sale is exactly on that point. I mean, I've always thought, and that's why obviously my gallery is thematically done, but there's a huge range. I think that's how people collect. You know, there are people who are fierce collectors of, you know, modern British or antiquities or whatever, but actually I think more generally people are collectors of a range of things. And I think that's what's so great about the sale is you come down and you will see a range of things. I mean, I think that's, you know, as someone who's involved in the sale, I mean, there's things that I've not seen before which I'm quite excited about. So
that's great. We've been asked whether we can introduce some historical perspective to the discussion. Well, if you've asked that question and you'd like to prompt us a little more or give us some insight, that would be great. We'd absolutely love to hear from you on that front. Ian, do you feel like you've been in good company in the Bonhams auction?
Well, absolutely. I mean, I would like to see the auction extended. I'd like to see, you know, ever more work in it, and certainly I would like to see it as a regular feature. I mean, I think, you know, the male nude, you know, is here to stay. It's been the pin-up for, shall we say, artists for several thousand years, you know, and it will go on being that. And I think that, you know, one needs to encourage it and one needs to celebrate it. I think, you know, and also as well, that I think looking at art is quite different to looking at pornography. Both can be done actually rather well, and actually can also be done with taste. And again, if you look at, you know, the Warren Cup, you know, the Warren Cup is unashamedly pornographic, but it was, if you like, a private drinking cup that would have been used in symposium, and you know, would have been sort of passed around for it to be admired and all the rest of it. I think, you know, we can still go a long way, you know, in our appreciation of the male nude. I mean, and I think, you know, what we do need to throw off are the shackles and restraints particularly in our culture, a lot of Christian sort of iconography and, sort of dogma. Although saying that, I'm always amazed, if I go to Spain, I love going to the churches and museums, and, the ecstatic look on Saint Sebastian or Christ as some ghastly thing is happening to them is quite amazing, and I mean, I'm sure that there's this, sort of duality in many ways, that this, sex, death, pleasure, pain, very often sculpture, well, I think sculpture is essentially, the making of images of death. And therefore, if you like, the opposite side of the coin is that of life. And, it's got to have some sort of erotic charge or sexual charge. I mean, certainly in the work I did for the Armed Forces Memorial, where I was rather pleased I managed to get 2 naked soldiers on the memorial. One is high up on a stretcher, and you just see the overhanging sort of wrist and hand. And then the other is on the floor. Nobody ever has complained about this. They see it as an essential part of the narrative. So I think, in public it is acceptable, as long as we can stop worrying about what other people think.
Madeline, is there always a clear delineation in antiquity between works that are erotic and works that are art, as it were? Is it always clear what's pornographic and what's not?
No, not really, because I don't think that, the ancient Romans, for example, particularly had that distinction. I think there was a slightly more functional attitude to it. So, I mean, I think you think about frescoes at Pompeii, a lot of them ended up in, the 19th century in the special cupboard of naughty things, not to be seen by people. But of course, that was just out there, things were out there on the wall of the brothel. So, the passing sailor from a, different port was like, oh, great, brothel. It had a very practical sort of image-based sort of purpose. And I think that, you can't sort of get away from that kind of imagery was everywhere in the ancient world, and just did not have the same sort of connotations that it has today. And I think, it's that sort of prudery thing, isn't it? That, why does nudity have to always be about sex? It sometimes it is, sometimes it really isn't. And I think that's what I enjoy about the ancient artworks, is that you can have very similar images, a nude man, doing something that's, pretty outrageous on a fresco wall, and a very similar image that is meant to depict the absolute, pinnacle of artistic achievement and, sort of male athleticism.
I think it's all about context, really. And one of the paintings that we really like in the sale is the 19th century work of the 2 monks singing, which is on our slideshow here. It's going to be lot 25 by Aurel Robert. And it's all about context, and we find it rather naughty, and we've kind of naughtily hung it near our Tom of Finland. There it is on screen right now, and I've been fascinated by this kind of borderline between kind of pornography and art. One of the lots I've really enjoyed cataloguing is the Basil Clavering archive of photographs, which were designed purely really as eroticism, as pornography. But now, kind of because of a bit of a historical remove, kind of gain an extra frisson.
And I think also very interesting is lot 23, which is an academic standing male figure with his arms raised, which really resembles, I think, the figure of Jesus. And it's really, it can be really shocking, but at the same time, it's really interesting to kind of take out maybe the religious context in some of the pictures that have such connotation, and kind of examine just the way that the male figure is being presented. I find it very interesting to kind of remove things from its context, and I think that's what we very successfully did in the sale. And I think that if someone comes around and actually sees the the exhibition, they would really see things that they were not meant to be sewn next to each other, and how that can actually create discussions.
We've had some people walk through the gallery saying, "Oh, there he is, it's sexy Jesus," which I think everyone's developed a bit of a nickname for some of the pieces here. Well, do any of our panelists have any more to add? If not, we may call it a wrap.
Or any questions from the participants that you would like to address either to Madeline, Henry, or Ian?
Just keep an eye on that. Well,
actually, can I just ask a question of Ian? Is there going to, because you obviously your memorial to Diana is being unveiled on the 1st of July. Is it there's going to be a big sort of grand opening and then it will be on public view from that point, or will there be restrictions? When does it open actually to the public? Is it on the 1st of July?
Yes, the opening, quite right, as you mentioned, is on the 1st of July. The actual opening itself, the unveiling, will be a private event. And obviously, Prince William and Prince Harry will both unveil it together. And there will be a small reception. And then, in fact, it will be the day after, on the 2nd of July, that it'll be open to the public. And also there's an exhibition of Diana's clothes there in the orangery. So, and there'll be plenty to see.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Fantastic. Well, we very much look forward to seeing that. A reminder, of course, that our view here at Bonhams New Bond Street is open tomorrow from 9 till 4:30 and on Wednesday from 9 till noon. And then the sale is at 2 p.m. On Wednesday. I think it just remains to thank our panelists so much for coming along, Maddie, Henry, and Ian. Somebody kindly wishing us good luck for the sale. Thank you very much, and thank you very much all for tuning in. We look forward to your participation on Wednesday afternoon. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Nice.